Hello, and welcome to The Mastering Show. My name is Ian Shepherd. I'm a mastering engineer, and I run the Production Advice website aimed at helping you get the best results recording, mixing, and mastering your music. And with me, as always, this week is my co-host, John Tidy. Hi, John. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm good. Hello, everyone.
And also, we have Glenn Schick from Glenn Schick Mastering. How long have you been mastering now, Glenn?
I have been mastering for 25, 26 years, somewhere around there.
Hey, you've been mastering even longer than me. That's fantastic. It always makes me feel old when I say how long I've been doing this job. Fantastic.
I've been engineering for more than 30, though. So.
Yeah, right. Well, we should talk to you about that in a minute. Well, first of all, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
The reason I decided to invite Glenn on now is that, in fact, he has, an album he has been working on has just won the Dynamic Range Day Award, which I chose. Yeah, absolutely. We'll be sending your massive trophy in due course, Glenn.
I'm expecting it in my driveway any day now. So
yeah, absolutely. We just had to get a large enough truck for it. So
yes,
it's. But and the album is, as you will know, if you've been taking part in Dynamic Range Day this year, is KOD by J. Cole. It's an excellent rap album, which just in the last couple of days hit #1 in the US charts. I believe it is the most streamed album in its first week ever. And it has great dynamics, which of course is part of the whole message of Dynamic Range Day, and is one of the reasons that I thought it would be great to have Glenn on as a guest, just to talk about the mastering process for that album. Maybe we could come on to that later. But Glenn, maybe you can just quickly give us a quick history of how you got into mastering.
I was initially got into the music biz as a musician. I was playing a kid in Queens, New York, playing rock guitar, and I was in the studios and, tracking my bands and things like that. And I was always a little bit of a geek tech head. I had a friend who came by a session and said, hey, I'm in the next room. You run the board while I go do something. And I said, I don't know how to run the board. So he showed me a few things, and I started, doing assistant engineer for him for tracking. And then I ended up getting involved with, it was a very weird serendipitous thing, but one of the first rap labels in New York, I was in the studio, again, playing guitar, and the guy next door, we just kind of hit it off. He was recording like some very early hip hop. And we became like writing and playing and recording partners. And we'd go into the studio in New York called Power Play, and we'd track things in the middle of the night when the time was cheap. And a self-taught engineer. This was a guy named Spider D, who is kind of one of the early pioneers of New York hip hop. And that's how I got started with engineering. And then mastering, after I'd been mixing and tracking and producing for a while, I had a friend of mine who I did a bunch of assistant sessions with. He's a very well-known rock producer, like a lot of heavy metal from the 70s, 80s, groups like Kansas and ELO. And he brought some gear over to my studio one day. I had a mix studio, tracking studio, and he brought some Neumann EQs and compressors that were racked up, and he said, try mastering. And I went, okay. And I kind of flubbed around at it and did some clients that I was working on mixing as well. And they said, oh, we really like this. And I said, really? I just had moved to Atlanta, Georgia. And I looked around, and there was one other guy mastering, and there was about 100 guys mixing. And I went, God, this would really be a smarter move to go start mastering. So I opened my mastering studio in 1994.
Which is about the year that I got into mastering. Yeah, that's about pretty much the same time as well. But so that's really interesting. So you didn't necessarily have any ambition to be either an engineer or a mastering engineer originally. They just kind of...
Originally, I think my initial thought was I would be a producer, which is kind of how I started. But and more of a musician, producer, that type of thing. No, actually, it wasn't really the goal to be an engineer.
So that's interesting because, I originally thought I wanted to be well, maybe a recording and mixing engineer more than a producer.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And I also I got into mastering because there was a studio that was doing it in a part of the country that I was interested in working in. But with hindsight, I realized that it was kind of the perfect career for me. And actually, I don't think I would have the patience to do, kind of long-term tracking or even necessarily long-term mixing stuff. Is that the same for you, or are you equally happy doing either?
I kind of wholeheartedly agree with you on that. It's I think mastering finds the personalities that fit, and those are the people that kind of prosper in our business. If you're kind of a perfectionist, and if you're kind of patient, and you kind of are a big picture person, I think all those qualities kind of lend themselves to our biz. And the tedium of tracking and mixing doesn't really apply to mastering. So it's a much fresher thing every day for me than going into the studio and recutting vocal parts, or, going back to a mix that I've been banging my head on. So it's much nicer for my, disposition to kind of deal with it.
Mm. Yeah, no, I agree. So one of the unusual things about you, the other reason that I was really keen to get you on the show, is that, you ran a traditional mastering facility, right? How long did you have, or you've had 2 or 3 studios?
I've had about 3 analog studios, some of them as big as 20,000 square feet with multiple rooms running, a lathe and several mastering rooms. And at one we had a recording studio as well. But I've run quite a few analog facilities.
More recently, you made the decision to become a mobile mastering engineer. Is that right?
I did. And honestly, I think it was around 2008, 2009. Things were just getting so ponderously hard to deal with that for overhead, and the way things were working wasn't really conducive to making a good living at the end of the day. And we had like this great stuff with beautiful equipment and great rooms and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, I felt like a lot of this was, there was a lot of paperwork. There was a lot of office drudgery. There was a lot of, dealing with staff and so forth. And everything kind of started feeling heavy on my shoulders. And around that time, I started getting the idea to put together a little rig to take with me to LA meetings that I used to have, that I used to always lose really good gigs. It would always be like, oh, Glenn, if you could do the single in an hour, you're going to get this great, Chris Brown job or something. So, and I'd always miss it because I never was ready for it, because, I'd be gone for 5 days, and then, by the time you get back, they're not waiting for you. So I put together this little rig to kind of take with me to do emergency jobs with. And surprisingly enough, it actually did pretty good. And I still had no idea what I was doing, which, is kind of my MO for my life, is that I don't know what I'm doing till I get good at it. And, the same thing happened when I switched over to in the box from, being an analog person for all those years. And subsequently, I went and closed my analog studio back in, I think it was around 2010. And I just had enough. And honestly, I was kind of ready to call it a day. And I really noticed like the quality of the in-the-box masters I was doing was suddenly getting better and better. And my clients were suddenly, I don't know what you've done lately, Glenn, but God, it's sounding good. And, I hadn't quite made this big announcement because I was honestly afraid to say, oh, I don't have an analog studio anymore. And I was waiting for the rocks and the cat calls to start coming, trader, whatever. And it didn't happen. And surprisingly, my clients not only accepted it, but embraced it. And I didn't really have any of those kind of old-fashioned, clients that were just like, oh, if you're not doing an analog, I'm not interested. They were all excited that I was doing something with newer technology, kind of on the cutting edge, and as we'll probably speak about shortly, without speakers. So
Well, okay, so yeah, there you go. That's the really surprising thing, because when I first heard that you had a mobile mastering rig, I know that Mandy Parnell took her monitoring system out to Iceland to master one of the Björk albums, for example.
right.
And I remember thinking that must be really tough, because a monitoring system is the speakers plus the room. No matter how good the room and no matter how good the speakers, you move somewhere completely different. Everything changes, and you're kind of back at the beginning of that learning curve. So, I mean, I was fascinated, impressed that she'd been able to do that. But I was reading that you were doing all these different projects. I was thinking, well, he can't possibly. And if you were taking your rig to meetings and stuff, then clearly, you're not using speakers. You're mastering on headphones. So, can you tell us a bit about that?
Sure. And when Mandy was doing her stuff, I was also probably in Iceland at the same time in Reykjavik in a basement on an Airbnb and mastering some probably #1 records at the time on the table of an Airbnb. So some of the things that allowed me to do that were I started working with some in-ears, and just really for the size and convenience sake at first. And I thought that those would be kind of more conducive than headphones, because I'd never really honestly liked a pair of headphones until recently, which we'll get to as well too probably. I kind of much preferred the immediacy and the intimacy that the in-ears provided. And I had heard like a lot of people saying, no, you can't really work like that. And, you can kind of do okay with it. But I didn't really believe that field had ever been really investigated by somebody and really pushed to as far as you could work it. I'm a real big believer, since I'm not a young engineer. I'm 55, kind of at that age where everybody's heydays right now, and the prime of their working. But I very much believe that your ears can almost adjust to anything once you've had the experience to know what to do with it. For example, lots of engineers in my age group, a little above, a little below, all have hearing damage. And, from years and years of, abuse as well as age and everything else, but do fantastic jobs with audio. Mm-hmm. So, everything's not about the actual frequency response of things. And, it's not a hard, fast rule that everything has to be a certain way. It has to be a certain way so you have the parameters to adjust what you need to adjust. But your brain relearns everything through another set of filters, I'll use that word for now, depending on, what experience you have. I don't think anybody could have done what I did if they didn't have the years of mastering behind it and just suddenly jumped into it with what I had. But I started with several pairs of in-ears and even started modifying a couple of them, and then bought new ones. And I have a whole drawer basically full of in-ears now, and spent quite a bit on it because it's kind of a new application for this. And very recently, I've started working with a headphone company and started working with them as to use for mastering monitoring, and had very good results so far.
Oh, that's fascinating. We'll come back to that in a second if it's okay. I mean, it's interesting because I have done a little bit of work on headphones specifically I have this thing called the Home Mastering Masterclass, which is a course that people can take to kind of improve their home mastering skills.
Sure.
And in order to do that and to avoid the problem of spill into the microphone, basically, I did the actual sound work for that on headphones, which, I mean, the Sennheiser HD650s, they're pretty good headphones. They're not kind of super expensive. And I was surprised that I was able to get as good a result as I was able to. I still went back and checked the stuff that I had done on speakers and occasionally made tweaks anyway. And I want to ask you about that as well. But John, I'm curious how do you feel about working on speakers versus headphones?
Yeah, a lot of times I'm working on headphones just kind of out of necessity, just background noise and stuff like that. But if it's a mastering project, I absolutely want to use my Focals monitors for that. And I will check things like the ends of songs on headphones just to make sure there's no noise or anything like that I want to take out. majority of it on speakers at a constant monitoring level.
I think 99.9% of all mastering guys work on speakers.
Yeah.
It's only just lately I'm starting to see a couple guys go, he's doing it, I can do that too.
Yeah.
But, it's not common.
Are there some of the in-ears that you would recommend? Someone's interested in that?
I've used like the JH Audio product, and that's very good. I've tinkered around with a few other ones, including some, no-name stuff. I've actually modified a few pairs, work with somebody to kind of try to create some things. I find with in-ears, you have to find the right thing. It's just like working with monitors where, one set of monitors is wonderful for you and another one is horrible for you. So unfortunately, the only in-ears that I really love are custom molded ones, as opposed to kind of the universal fit ones. So it's kind of hard to preview those easily. I mean, you can kind of get maybe 80% of the idea of what they sound like through the universal versions of them, but the custom molding and the seals become so important that there's really no other way to kind of achieve the right sound without that.
Do you get the impression of the full frequency response when you're using those? Because one of my feelings about speakers versus headphones, I mean, I do find it fascinating, and kind of my experience working with the Sennheisers makes me think that if I put as much time into learning how stuff sounded on those as I have into learning how stuff sounded on my monitors, I feel like probably I could get to the point where I was happy mastering on them as well, except maybe for just the kind of the sheer physicality, if you like, of the sound in the room, of the bass hitting you in the chest and stuff. So with over-the-ear headphones, you have a little sense of that. You can still kind of feel a bit of pressure, if you like. Do you get that with the in-ears, or do you have to kind of intuit that somehow?
Well, if your in-ears are a great fit, and sometimes they'll take like several fittings to get to that point, yes, you can, but it's got a different set of just vibe to how you're working, because the in-ears obviously are in your skull, as the over-the-ear headphones are farther from your eardrum. So there's just kind of a closer, more immediate kind of feel to working with in-ears than there are with headphones. They both can be good and they both can be horrible, just really depending on your taste and how the products fit you.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm almost tempted to experiment. I mean, I have a young family, so I don't necessarily need to head off around the world, because that's the other interesting thing about what you've done is that, I mean, I literally didn't know when I Skyped you where you were going to be in the world to do this call. You could have been in Thailand or South Korea or any number of other places. Is that right? Are you still traveling around, or have you settled for a while back in LA? What's the situation?
I'm in LA for the next foreseeable little bit, but I hope to get back out again soon. I've been here for a few months and, got a place. But, my heart always kind of wants to get out on the road every once in a while. And, I'm just taking care of some business in the States now. But after I get done with that, I hope to be out again.
No, it's a really, really cool, interesting idea. So you obviously took a load of time figuring out the gear that was going to be part of your rig. I'm guessing, do you have some kind of external converter?
Yeah, I use high quality DACs, and now I'm working with a company called Chord, a British company, and they're using their DACs, and quite happy with them. So,
yeah, that's cool. I've had the Chord recommended to me, so I'm interested. And do you use like a separate headphone amplifier, or is that built into the?
That's built
unit?
Into these DACs, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right, cool. And in terms of the gear that you use, I mean, one of my kind of little slogans, if you like, is "It ain't what you use, it's the way that you use it." I really believe that providing you have, like you were saying about monitoring, providing you have a certain standard available to you, you can almost use anything to achieve the results that you need, especially in mastering, perhaps, where it's a kind of a more focused feature set that you're looking for, perhaps, than the kind of the full range of creative stuff that you might use in tracking and mixing. Do you find it, now that you're used to doing the in the box method, do you find that kind of restrictive in any way?
It's actually the opposite of restricted. It's actually a freeing thing. For my clients, a lot of my clients are, fairly well-known artists and are on a deadline for schedule. And so when crash comes to the last part of the process, which is mastering, they'll deliver, say it's a 17-song album and there's 5 versions. There's, cleans and mains and instrumentals and TV tracks. So you'll have, 160 separate tracks that need to be delivered. And while you're doing this, the process, they're changing edits and, so you're working on delivering finals and they're still changing their mind on mix stuff. Mm-hmm. And so when I was back in the analog days, I would have to sit there and manually reset all my settings and roll tape or roll whatever the digital file was and, wait for everything to go through that. And now I just call back my sessions and bang, I've got all my stuff set up. It's ready to run another, revision that they've sent with a small edit that they've done. It's no big deal. I can print stuff faster. I can work faster. There's nothing that's been a negative on this. And that was the shocking thing for me. I figured there would be something that I kind of had a call for, like, oh, I really miss those days because of this. But that doesn't exist. I don't really miss anything about the old days. And when I look at my old gear, which, I still have some junk in storage, and I call it junk because, I can look at an old piece of mastering gear and that's what it looks like now. It looks like junk that I just want to get rid of. So I'm not romantic at all about old days and old gear and how I used to do things because it doesn't matter anymore.
No, it's really interesting. 'Cause I kind of come to the same place from the opposite end in the sense that when I got into mastering, the place that I worked, I've said this before on the show, was 100% digital. And that was a selling point, right? Because digital then was the new thing and everybody wanted that DDD symbol on their,
exactly.
on their CDs. And so that's, I kind of learned that the craft from that basis. And now I kind of look at the analog options that are out there and I kind of think, well, is it worth, sinking thousands of dollars into this or that piece of gear? And for the most part, I just don't feel the need, So yeah, no, it's really interesting to hear that. And I mean, I think things are going to go more and more that way. I know that Jonathan Weiner, I think at MWorks Mastering, is completely happy to master 100% in the box these days. And I think, we have more and more mixing engineers coming out and saying that kind of thing. So yeah, I imagine it's going to go more along those lines. Now, so we're not that bothered about what the gear is, but I know people listening will be fascinated to know, do you have any particular favorite plugins or bits of tools that you could share that people might like to experiment with?
Well, I mean, in general, there's a couple companies that I think make really nice product and a nice assortment of product as well. So I like Plugin Alliance makes some wonderful things. I use a lot of their EQs and some of their other processing. And FabFilter also is another company that I use a bunch of their stuff, and they make really good gear. A plugin I use quite often, actually all the time, is a plugin called Perception. You may be familiar with.
I think I might have heard of that one somewhere, actually. Oh, that's really cool. I'm really pleased you like it and you find it useful.
Honestly, I'm kind of a minimalist. I don't use a ton of plugs. When I used to master in analog, I didn't have a ton of things in my chain. I try to keep things as kind of clean and, uncluttered, even in the digital realm. So, I tend to less is more. My clients work really hard to make their mixes, and I don't want to undo that work.
No, I absolutely agree. It's interesting. I mean, you mentioned, you've got some pretty big name clients. Did you ever do attended mastering sessions? And do you still do them? If you do, how do they work? Or is it all kind of remote work these days?
So, yes, I used to do attended sessions, and they were the worst. Just hands down, there was nothing more painful than an attended session. It would slow them down. It would cost the client more because they would end up tallying more hours and having to stop and listen and kind of guess what adjustment they thought they should tell me to make, which probably didn't need to be made even. And so it ended up really working counterproductive for the clients. They'd end up with a bigger bill. They'd undo the work that I did, which then I'd have to redo again after. And it just never was a good thing. It was stressful as well, too, with somebody over your shoulder. So, now I master, I make my cup of tea in the morning, I'm in my underwear, and I walk up to my computer and, I sip my tea and I very relaxed go to my first job. And I still have an office in Atlanta that, sets up all my jobs and gets everything ready. So, everything's ready for me in the morning when I'm ready to work in a good time to work. Not that's been dictated to me by the client. You're going to come in, at 11:30 at night after you're exhausted and start working on this again. That's not the way I work anymore. So I come in well rested and ready to work and do a great job now because I can. Mm-hmm. So, and honestly, my success rate of masters at the first shot, without needing adjustments or whatever, is usually around 94 to 96%. So, I'm happy with that. If once in a while I need to make an adjustment for a client, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. Even redo something if somebody's really unhappy, but that's really rare. And, now also making an adjustment is no big deal. It's not another afternoon to set up to, recall all my analog settings and, it's no big deal. I call up the file, I load back in the plugins and I run as a new thing and I adjust it. Zip-de-doo.
No, that's very cool. Another practical thing. Everything you're saying is really appealing to me, but I actually really like just the familiar kind of environment of my room, coming in, closing the door, kind of there's a kind of a mindset thing that happens there as well. Do you set yourself up a kind of a separate space in wherever if you're kind of around the world somewhere? Do you have a work room, or I can imagine you working, sitting, looking out over some beautiful beach somewhere? Or
the places I've worked over the last 4 years have been amazing. So, like you mentioned, I'd work out of, in Reykjavik in Iceland, and, I'd set up in an Airbnb, and it'd usually be like a kitchen table. There was a place I was mastering in Busan, South Korea, and I set up my workstation literally facing the water and, like you said, on a beach basically. And I had this amazing coastline view, and I'd master every day, again, just drinking my coffee or tea and, just always in a good mindset because I would bring these beautiful places to my work. So I wasn't really missing any of the, studio stuff other than the social aspect of, saying hi to everyone and, meeting some new clients and stuff. I do miss that, but, I still talk to them and interact with them and all that. So it's not that bad.
It doesn't sound that bad at all. I'm sure you're going to be inspiring a whole new generation of budding mastering engineers who are listening to this. Listen, great work on KOD.
Thank you.
For J. Cole. I love the way that it sounded. I mean, it's still a loud album, but it's intended to be, right? It's still quite an aggressive, the beats and stuff need to hit hard.
Yeah.
I know that J. Cole, the album before his last one, Forest Hills Drive, I remember reading an interview where he said he deliberately wanted that one to be more dynamic when he got it mastered. Mm-hmm. And that was, but I think that was kind of had more of a mellow, laid back feel perhaps in this one. And then the album in between, I was disappointed that he seemed to have changed his mind about that and it was pushed much harder. So did it come from him this time that he wanted to take a step back again, or was it from you? And what was that conversation like?
So we did actually have a talk before we started getting into the album. And this album particularly, he did a lot of his own tracking and did some of the initial mixes, not the ones that ended up on the album, because this guy, Mez Davis, did the mixes for the album. He really was hands-on, in other words, on this record more than any other record he's been. And he was very much trying to understand the process. And the mastering part was the hardest part for him because it wasn't his hands-on process that he'd been used to.
Mm-hmm.
So, we had a talk at the beginning, and he told me, he wanted it this and that, and really, the mixes had huge amounts of bass information, and he was really digging that. And, we had a discussion at first that, that's going to prevent a little bit of the volume from, going up if we want to maintain some dynamic range on this. And, to J. Cole's credit, he was very receptive and kind of respectful for my position on it. So I very much appreciated him as a client, letting me do my thing. And during the process, we did try a couple of things, going a little more this way or going a little more this way, and, just to kind of let him hear what it sounded like. But for the most part, we kind of agreed that, this was the best balance of dynamic versus loudness versus, low end, how much, body is left there. And we really were able to keep, pretty much all the body of what he had for his tracks without sacrificing a lot. And, I didn't crush anything, which is, hopefully why I'm here.
Yeah, absolutely. Was there a lot of work to do, or was it one of those kind of, it was more like polishing projects? I mean, there was a lot of variety between the tracks, or was it, I guess if he'd done it all himself in the same space, maybe it was pretty cohesive already?
No, it was a lot of work, this album, both from his side and from my side. But, I think he's very meticulous about how he works and wants it the way he feels in his mind that it's supposed to sound. So, it went through a bunch of revisions, not necessarily all on mastering, but definitely on mastering too. But so we tried some different things and saw where the best place for him was, where he was comfortable with it, where I was comfortable with it. And, that's what we settled on for the final stuff. So,
no, it sounds ideal. There are different kind of types of mastering engineers. I know there are some guys who almost every project, the first thing they do is send it back with some comments saying, I really think you should address this, this, and this. Personally, I tend to find there isn't enough time to do that usually, because people, it's like all right at the last minute. So it's usually a case of, well, that's what we have, and you just got to make the best that you can with that. How does it go for you usually?
Well, it varies from project to project. The guy who was the mix engineer, Mez, was a real pleasure to work with. And, he's his staff engineer and, is a really hardworking guy and a talented guy. So he did a bang up job on the stuff too. And, was kind of the go-between between, J. Cole's wanting something to what I could deliver. And, Mez would kind of work with it, in between to kind of get the balance for both of us working right. So it was a team effort in every way, which is that's the kind of jobs I love. Some of my favorite engineers is guys like Seth Perkins, who passed away last year, features engineer. And, guys like that are guys that are always conscious that this is team effort. This is not me being, the hotshot mastering guy. This is not you being the hotshot mixer, or, the producer doesn't, get an attitude either. We're all working on the same side to get something good. And those are the projects that are always the most fulfilling. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And the great thing about this is that, obviously it's had such a great reception. There's great reviews. The stats in terms of the streaming and the chart positions and stuff are fantastic. So I love the fact that J. Cole has taken the decision to trust your advice, as you say, and go with something that maybe is not what people necessarily expect. And the audience are going, yeah, we love this stuff. And that's, one of the big reasons that I wanted to choose this for the Dynamic Range Day Award is just because the whole idea of the award is to show people that this is possible. I think there are so many people who feel that they have to do things a certain way in order to achieve success or sales or whatever. I've seen a change over the last couple of years of people becoming more aware of the way that things sound when they get played online because of loudness normalization, and just the fact that there have been some huge releases that have been hugely successful that have been more dynamic. Have you seen a change in what your clients are asking you to do, or is it the kind of same as it ever was? How do you feel about it?
It's not the same as it was. It's really kind of gotten better in many ways to me. Like this business is much more pleasurable for me now than it was 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. And, my clients are very, as I said with J. Cole, respectful of the fact that I want to do good for them. So, one of my mottos for my business is serve the music. And, that's the only way you can really approach this business is if you leave your ego behind and try to really do the best thing for their product. So I have, some really, large clients like Amazon Music and things like that, where we discussed, they have a streaming platform that's all their own. And, we discussed about volume before we started getting into, some large projects. And they kind of let me set the levels where I wanted to set it. And that was really refreshing and wonderful. And, the quality of the stuff sounds better because of that. So,
yeah, I mean, just literally the last week or two, kind of coming up to because as you know, the award, I only announced the award on Friday. And this album was only released a week before. So it was a real kind of last minute, went straight to the top of the pack, if you like. But over the last few weeks, I've just been kind of trying to make sure that I haven't missed any great, potential candidates, and kind of talking to people. And yeah, I mean, in particular, the Janelle Monáe album that's just come out this week, I was really hopeful about. I was listening to it on YouTube and thinking, this sounds fantastic. And it's not crushed at all. It's, and unfortunately, I then went over and listened to it on Apple Music. And I'm assuming that's the same master that has gone out for CD. And sure enough, it's like 3 or 4 dBs louder, which is kind of crazy to me because it's like that's an example where literally I would choose to listen to the YouTube version versus the CD because it sounds better. And it's just such a shame to know that those great sounding mixes were there coming out of the studio, and then at some stage, it was decided that the CD had to be pushed harder for whatever reason. And yeah, I mean, people are the same thing about vinyl. You have technically, in terms of the specifications, an inferior format where sometimes the vinyl cuts sound better, again, because they have a more dynamic material, and that's preserved onto the vinyl where, in the CDs, it's not. So
the vinyl, honestly, I was going to say, because we cut vinyl for years, but some of the reason that the vinyl sounds better now is literally because most cutting engineers, guys that operate the lathes, are so afraid to blow the cutting heads now, which are almost irreplaceable. Parts for lathes are almost impossible to get now, but specifically the heads, there's only like 2 guys in the world that can repair them now. So, people are very cautious of volume and really pushing things for vinyl now, especially. So it's actually worked in the benefit for getting better sounding records too. But they're very cautious now because of that.
Interesting. Yeah, I've never cut vinyl. I've heard that that's one of the reasons stuff doesn't get cut too hot is to avoid burning out the head. But the fact that it's just impossible to repair them is that's yet another perspective on it. Well, listen, thank you so much. It's been great talking to you, John. I'm aware that I've completely monopolized the conversation. Just listening to us talking here, were there any questions that you'd be interested to ask Glenn, or anything you think we should go circle around on and look at in more detail?
I may have had a question, but I've forgotten it. I've been enjoying the conversation, so no worries at all.
Oh, I remembered one thing I was going to ask you, Glenn. You mentioned that you were happy using in-ears, but you might have found a pair of traditional headphones that you were interested in. Are you able to share what those are?
Yeah, actually, the entire KOD album was mastered with some Audi's headphones, and I've recently started working with them, and actually going up to their factory tomorrow in California. And they're a really interesting company, and they make some really unique product that's kind of sonically, it stands a little apart from anything else I've heard. And it's electrostatic drivers as opposed to dynamic. So it's been, a little adjustment for me, as far as that as well. But I've been getting really good results with it. And I'm looking forward to exploring more with them in the future. So
Yeah, I'm really interested to try some electrostatic headphones. Bob Katz played me some stuff on them when I was at the AES convention last year, and they sounded amazing.
I'll tell you honestly, one of the biggest things, even though we had like great Francis Manzella design rooms and, $100,000 Dunlavy speakers and, all this kind of, creme de la creme of acoustic stuff. When you were working in an analog room, you'd go lean over to grab the EQ in the rack to the right of you, and now you're off axis on the tweeter and things sound different. So, for all that's said and done for, wonderful acoustic rooms, and I'm not putting them down in any way, there's also a lot of advantages to not, having your head change the axis constantly of your where the sweet spots are and, where the phase relationships are in the audio. So, no less having a room negatively affect certain things, which all rooms do. Some people would rather list the disadvantages. I'd rather list the advantages of the format I use now, and just really say that I can do a way more consistent and better job than I ever have in my life. And, I think the proof is in the pudding. The Cole album is #1 this week. We had a bunch of #1s last year. We got a Grammy this year. Things are, looking fairly sweet for us.
Yeah, I was going to say, it certainly seems to be working for you. Absolutely. That's why I was so fascinated to get you on the show, because I think it's really thought-provoking and interesting. And also, I think inspirational for, especially people who are up and coming. Yeah, if I was going to be starting out today, there's no way that I would invest in a, $1 million room or whatever it was for all the reasons that you've said. It just wouldn't make economic sense. But you need to feel confident that you're able to do a great job with the setup you have. So to start exploring these new options, I think is really exciting and interesting.
Yeah, no, I think that the younger engineers will have to develop their brain and skills to kind of work into these type of equipment setups, but that's certainly doable.
Yeah. Well, listen, thank you so much again for sharing that and for making the time to talk to us. If people want to find out more about what you're doing, it's basically GS Mastering, isn't it? It's gsmastering.com.
The name of the company is actually Glenn Schick Mastering, but our web address is gsmastering.com. Instagram is GS Mastering, Twitter GS Mastering, Facebook. That's the easiest way to find us. But we're pretty visible. So
excellent. Well, listen, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ian, and thank you, John.
Thanks to John for being a great co-host as ever, even though you didn't get to say much this time, and for mixing and editing the episodes as always.
My pleasure.
Thanks to Kaylee Law for letting us use his music. If you would like to check out any of the show notes for this episode or any others, I've also interviewed on past episodes Bob Ludwig and Matt Colton, previous mastering engineers who worked on albums that won the Dynamic Range Day Award. Head over to themasteringshow.com. Please leave us a review, themasteringshow.com/review. And thanks for listening.